this presentation. It's an update on vegetarian, vegan, and raw nutrition. It's entirely vegan and has items of interest to vegetarians and near vegetarians as well. So our latest book, Becoming Vegan, to our great pleasure, has been recognized as the go-to book for vegan nutrition. And the material we're covering here is relating to that book and also Becoming Raw. Becoming Vegan was recognized by the American Library Association, won a 2014 Canada Book Award, and was a finalist in the Forward Book of the Year. Becoming Raw has been seen as the gold standard on the topic by David Katz of Yale University, and he said if you're trekking to vegan and raw heights, Davis and Melina are the best Sherpas in the business. Don't make the trek without them. And so these are books of interest about vegan nutrition and also some recipes, especially in Becoming Raw. You have them in your bookstore at the conference. Our books are also in various languages throughout Europe, and coming soon and even more in Polish. Brenda Davis and I had the opportunity of coming to Dresden at the IVU conference in 2008, and we were very happy to make that trip. And also Brenda's son-in-law, Naiden, is from Bulgaria, so she plans to come to that area to visit his family, and so she would be very pleased to connect with those of you who live in that region at a future date. What we're going to cover in this presentation is, on a plant-based diet, where will I get my protein? What are iron-rich plant foods for babies, for infants, for children, and for everybody else? What about vitamin B12? Are carbohydrates good or bad? Is soya or soy good or bad? And will a vegetarian diet, vegan diet specifically, make you healthier? So the first item, protein. I guess all of you are probably familiar with this situation where someone asks you, well, if you're only eating plant foods, where will you get your protein? And we are well aware by looking at large herbivore animals that people can build strong muscles, as many animals do, with a plant-based diet. So this elephant, the gorilla, we can get protein from plant foods in abundance. Protein is present in all groups of plant foods: grains, seeds and nuts, legumes, also known as pulses, that is the beans, the peas, the lentils, the soy foods, the vegetables, and to a lesser extent the fruit. When people go on mainly fruit-centered diets, as some of the raw foods enthusiasts have done, they can end up being short in protein. Otherwise, when you center your diet on mainly whole plant foods, protein is not an issue. If calories are really low, or if a diet's centered mainly on fruit, or if there are a lot of vegan junk foods in the diet, things like potato chips, sugary treats, then the protein can be low. But otherwise, protein is not an issue. The percentage of calories from protein that we need is about 10 to 20% of calories. And animal products are well known as protein sources because the percentage of calories from protein ranges from, as you see here for the animal products in the lower part of the slide, ranges from about 25 to 39%. And the rest of the calories are from fat. In plant foods, as you can see in the greens here, the non-starchy vegetables, the beans, there is easily 25 to 39% as well. So we can certainly reach these heights, even though we don't need quite as high a percentage. Now, grains and nuts and seeds are actually in the perfect range of percent calories from protein. And the one food group that is kind of short is the fruits. In fact, in some of the raw food studies, such as the Geeson study, some of the women who were on raw food diets ended up losing their menstrual periods. Their protein intake was a little low, their iron, their zinc, in fact their calories, and they ended up being insufficient to build extra blood that was needed and became amenorrheic. Some of the big studies have been done, such as the Epic Oxford study, that have looked at people's health, their weight, different issues related to diet. It has been observed that the average body mass index, or weight, has decreased as people adopted a more plant-based diet. So you can see here from the Epic Oxford study that the meat eaters had a BMI at the high end of the optimal range. The fish eaters, a little lower, and in the same league with the lacto-ovo vegetarians who consume a vegetarian diet plus milk products and eggs. And the vegans had a BMI right in the middle of the optimal range. In a similar Adventist health study that was done, very large population groups, it was also found that as people's diets became more plant-based, their BMI was in a much more optimal or healthy range. Now notice in these studies, the populations that were observed were relatively health conscious. So these studies involved a health conscious population even when they were not entirely vegetarian or vegan. If we're looking at protein through the day, it's really good idea to start out with protein right from the start and include in your breakfast. For example, if you have a smoothie, a real quick way to get a start, there are many protein powders that can be added based on pea protein, rice protein, hemp protein, and these can boost your protein to a third or quarter of your recommended intake very, very easily, giving you a good start. Green smoothies can be high in protein, and another way to get protein is to use sprouted or soaked grains. And another quick breakfast is toast with peanut butter or nut butter. And then soy milk has considerable amounts of protein. You can also use tofu or soy foods, make it into a scrambled tofu. So you can add turmeric to make it yellow and add some vegetables, and this is a way a lot of people like to get a good start to the day with protein. Just as quick as scrambled eggs. It's really important to include legumes at most meals, beans, peas, and lentils. These are the richest protein sources in the plant kingdom. They're also high in the amino acids lysine, which is needed for growth, and tryptophan, which is needed for maintenance of protein for adults. Legumes are high in B vitamins, iron, zinc, and many of them are excellent sources of calcium as well. So they're very important to include, and I think when people don't do so well on plant-based diets, it's because they don't get the practical aspects of including legumes quite right. Adults need about 45 to 75 grams of protein per day. It's 0.9 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. And each of the items shown on this slide has about 15 grams of protein. So for example, a cup of beans or lentils cooked, 60 mils of seitan, 170 grams of tofu, a veggie burger, you can check the label on the package, peanut butter or almond butter with 2 slices of bread, and then some sprouted or cooked quinoa, soy milk, 2 cups of soy milk will have 15 grams of protein. These are much higher than the other non-dairy beverages like rice beverage or hemp beverages, almond milk. These are much lower in protein, but the soy milk's quite significantly high. Almonds, handful of almonds will give you protein, pumpkin seeds, and when you're using greens, they can definitely provide protein, but you do need a big volume. See, 450 grams of broccoli or kale. It's quite a bit. But some people do eat great big salads and large amounts of these greens, so it can add up a lot. Now, iron, this is an important one, and it's the most likely deficiency in, not for vegetarians, but for everybody, for children, for teenagers, for women who menstruate. And studies typically show, though, that vegetarians and vegans are not more anemic than the non-vegetarian population. In fact, they get more iron. It's a little less readily absorbed, but we get more to start with. And especially vegan diets can be very good in this. And when we build them the way that I'm talking here. Some of the best sources of iron are the beans, peas, lentils, soy foods, nuts and seeds, mushrooms, leafy greens, whole grains, dried fruits like apricots and currants and raisins. We can increase our iron absorption as well when we soak foods and sprout them. For example, when you make sprouted lentils or mung beans, you can do that just in a jar with a mesh lid. And also when we soak or ferment or leavened bread or fermented things like kimchi. Iron absorption can be increased significantly when you include a vitamin C rich source. For example, if you had red pepper in your tofu stir fry, that'll increase the iron absorption. It can be even 3 to 6 times. Then for infants, things have changed a lot in the world of baby feeding. This is my little grandson here. And in the last few years, there's been a reversal of our attitudes about preventing allergy. It used to be that foods were delayed, the introduction of nuts, of peanuts for the general population in order to avoid allergies. Now we realize that there's kind of an optimal time to introduce foods, and it's may vary from one food to another, but somewhere around 6-7 months. And so some of the really good iron sources that can be introduced to a young infant, 6 months old and thereabouts, when we start introducing solid foods, are soy formula with iron after breast milk has been the best start. Iron fortified cereals, perhaps made with this iron rich formula. Tofu, well cooked mashed beans, lentils or peas, and apricots. So these are all great ways to give your baby a good start. Then in summary, it's important to include 3 servings of legumes each day for iron and zinc. And that can be soy milk, peanut butter, handful of peanuts. Like, it doesn't have to be eating 3 big cups of beans. So it's actually quite easily done once you put that in place. On raw diets, of course, people wouldn't be having cooked beans as much, although it's a very wise idea to have a diet that's high raw and then include some cooked lentils or beans, something like that. But some good iron foods, and these are good protein foods as well, are peas in the pod, pumpkin seeds, buckwheat granola, sprouted lentils, smoothie that can be quite high in iron, it has lots of greens in it, like kale. So there are plenty of choices here. Next, carbohydrates. People wonder, are carbohydrates good or bad? They've been really downplayed as healthy foods and criticized quite heavily. But the problem is that approximately 90% of the carbohydrates eaten by many people are refined with great nutrient losses in the process. All of the items shown in this slide are very low in other nutrients, which have been stripped from the grain in the processing. When we look at how different foods affect our blood sugar, it is of great interest to see that the different foods can have quite markedly different effects. And just think about how this affects your own day. On your left, we see a dotted line which refers to sugar and juice. And if we have a serving of that drink a glass of juice, for example, we'll have a rise in blood sugar. It's quick, comes up in about 15 or 20 minutes, and then drops quickly. So if you start your day with juice, and it's fairly similar with fruit, you'll have a rise in blood sugar, but it doesn't last very long. Next, refined starchy foods, like the ones we saw in the last picture, will raise your blood sugar, maybe in half an hour. Then there's what's sometimes called the Chinese restaurant syndrome, or we will find that partway through the morning, after a white croissant or a Danish pastry or something like that, or through the afternoon if you had just some white pasta for lunch, the energy will drop. It'll stay up for about an hour and a half, and then your energy or your blood sugar will drop. When we shift our diet to including more fibrous, starchy foods, so these are whole grain products, then we end up getting a much longer blood sugar leveling effect. And when something's ground into flour, it has a lower glycemic index when it's a whole grain, but when it's an entire intact grain, it'll have a lower glycemic index still, and will have a very good blood sugar leveling effect, lasting a couple of hours. So your different whole grain products will serve you much better to keep your energy sustained for a few hours after a meal. And then the legume group, the beans, peas, lentils, tofu, are the blood sugar superstars. They really keep your energy going for a few hours, quite a few hours, and will sustain you through the afternoon, through the morning after a meal, without needing to snack and without your energy just sagging. So legumes have excellent fiber to sustain their energy. That's because that helps there be a slow, gradual release of glucose, and whole grains do too. Here's some raw examples: the rye crackers from Becoming Raw, or another one that I really like is raw corn. If you haven't tried it, it's really, really good. So choose whole grains, and some of them intact. Next, vitamin B12. Can we get enough vitamin B12 from plant foods or internal production? There are a lot of myths going on about vitamin B12 in the vegan and raw foods community, although most leaders and speakers are well aware that we do need the supplements and fortified foods. It has been expressed in the past that we could get vitamin B12 from seaweeds, for example, but seaweed contains both active and inactive or interfering forms of vitamin B12. The B12 analogs can take the place of where we need true B12 but not get the job done. Chlorella and AFA, or blue-green algae, may contain usable forms of B12, but cannot be relied on as the sole sources. They've been tested in experiments with vegans who were vitamin B12 deficient and didn't relieve the deficiency in everyone. Fermented foods can contain a little vitamin B12 by chance, just if some bacteria got into the mix that are B12 producing. Organic vegetables can contain a little B12 from dirt, for example, but none of these should be relied on as our B12 sources. B12 comes from microorganisms, from bacteria, and whether your diet includes animal products or not, that's the actual source. There's one more area that people sometimes think that we can get vitamin B12 from our internal production, and that means in our saliva and in our lower intestines where we have these bacteria. But in fact, we don't get enough from these areas. There's not enough from salivary production, and B12 production in your intestine happens further along the intestinal tract than the absorption site, like farther down. So that doesn't work either. The studies in North America and in Europe consistently show vitamin B12 deficiency in raw vegans and other vegans if they're not regularly taking supplements or fortified foods. In fact, from these studies, the average B12 levels were less than 1 to 200 picograms per mil, whereas the recommended level, the lower end of the range, is about 400 picograms per mil. And these were people who'd been vegan about 3 years. So the symptoms of deficiency, the tingling, the gastrointestinal problems, and so on, the nerve damage hadn't started to show up. But it is really important to get a reliable source of vitamin B12. And reliable B12 sources include, for example, fortified foods. If you look on the label and see it says vitamin B12 or cyanocobalamin, you can be sure that that has some B12 in it, a reliable source. And you'd want to have that at 2 different times in the day to get adequate intakes. Nutritional yeast is one that's commonly used. It has a kind of cheesy flavor and is added to a favorite salad dressing in both of our books, and also can be sprinkled on popcorn. People like it all kinds of different ways, but that's one option. You can also just simply use a multivitamin supplement, which usually has about 25 micrograms a day, or some other daily supplement of B12. Or you can have 1,000 micrograms twice a week from a supplement. Next, soy foods. Is soy good or bad? There are 2 excellent websites that refer to issues about soy foods and issues about lots of vegan-related nutrition issues. One is from Jack Norris. He's a dietitian who actually became a dietitian after he was a vegan because he wanted to help people get their nutrition right. And so his website's veganhealth.org, and he's got articles about soy and really good ones about vitamin B12. Another is a Dr. Michael Greger, nutritionfacts.org, and he has he's quite humorous little video clips that come out several times a week. Soy intake in childhood. It turns out that moderate soy consumption, and that means about 2 servings a day for children, in childhood, adolescence, and throughout puberty, reduces lifetime breast cancer risk for girls, and it appears that it poses some advantages for boys as well. The American Institute of Cancer Research has put out press releases in the last few years, and for a while there was some concern that people who had breast cancer or breast cancer in the family should be careful about soy. But it turns out that breast cancer survivors are protected by using soy. That a meta-analysis has shown that those with the highest intake, and that would be like 2 or 3 servings a day, had reduced mortality and reduced recurrence of breast cancer. And in postmenopausal women, the recurrence was reduced by 35%. So soy appears to be very protective. It has isoflavones that are somewhat similar to estrogen, and that's why it has these protective hormonal effects. Is soy okay with men? There have been some worries about soy, and the rumors, which of course were widely propagated by the Weston Price Foundation and the animal products industry, who are concerned about the popularity of soy, but these were based on two cases. One in which a man consumed 12 servings a day of soya milk, and the other who consumed 14 to 20 servings of soya foods a day. Now, if anybody centered their diet so much on a single food, they would get into trouble. And these ones did after a year of this very high intake of this single food. I mean, you can imagine if people ate that much beef or eggs or carrots, any food, that the diet would be so imbalanced it would miss other nutrients and provide problems. So overall, will a vegetarian diet make me healthier? Yes, it certainly can, and you do want a well-balanced one, but there's very good research to support this yes. 2 large, well-designed prospective studies. These 2 are very interesting studies because even the non-vegetarian people in the studies were pretty health conscious. But the results were quite remarkable when they looked at the long-term mortality rates, health, weight, all sorts of health indicators. What about the risk of cardiovascular disease in vegetarians? The EPIC Oxford study has indicated that vegetarians are 32% less likely to develop heart disease than the health-conscious meat eaters or fish eaters. It used to look like the fish eaters were somewhat more protected, but I think with the way we pour toxic materials into our oceans, fish aren't looking like such a health food after all. And so the vegetarians are doing quite well regarding cardiovascular disease. There was an early study, the Lifestyle Heart Trial, by Dean Ornish, a doctor, and I had the good fortune to be a staff dietitian with this project. There was a lifestyle intervention group, no medications, and these were all people with serious heart disease. The lifestyle intervention that they undertook was a near vegan diet. It was vegan plus a bit of skim milk and egg whites, very limited amounts of those 2. There was moderate exercise, like half an hour walking a day, stress reduction, learning yoga, this sort of thing, and also social connection, and no medication changes. In the lifestyle intervention group, their total cholesterol fell 37%. Versus a 6% drop in the control group, who were following the American Heart Association's pattern. Just eat less bacon, eat less fat type of thing, do your best. The lifestyle intervention group experienced an 82% regression of arterial blockages. In other words, the arteries that were closed opened. And this was in the period of a year, versus a 53% progression in closure in the control group. Angina fell 91% in the lifestyle intervention group, versus a 165% increase in angina in the controls. So this was a remarkable study that really turned people's concepts around about whether you could intervene in heart disease without medications. Hypertension. Compared with health-conscious non-vegetarians, the risk of hypertension is 8% lower in people who move to a partly vegetarian diet, at least they're vegetarian many days of the week. 43% lower in lacto-ovo vegetarians, and 63% lower in vegans. So that's a quite significant change. And that's defining hypertension as people whose indicators were 139/89 milligrams of mercury or higher than that, or who used antihypertensive medications. So that was the group that was studied in this. For cardiovascular diseases, it's clear that plant-based diets protect and are more powerful than medications for treatment and for reversal. Next, cancer. The American Institute of Cancer Research has put out some very interesting materials. They give out a free book every few years if you write to their website for it. That's aicr.org. And the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute of Cancer Research have a group from over 30 countries of 100 nutrition and cancer experts who collaborate. And they look at diets around the world and cancer rates and figure out what lifestyle choices are really protective. They advise us eat mostly plant foods, and eating all plant foods is fine. Limit red meat, and that advisory has been getting stronger and stronger in the last few years. And entirely avoid processed meat. So that means like bacon, ham, canned salt pork, that kind of thing, are called processed meats. And they are strongly linked with many types of cancer. The vegetarian-vegan cancer rates compared with non-vegetarians, lacto-ovo-vegetarians have a lower cancer risk, 8% lower, and less gastrointestinal cancer. Of course, that fiber really helps avoid cancer. The vegan overall cancer risk is 16% lower, and the female cancer risk for like breast and ovarian cancer is 34% lower. Those people with the highest meat intake have a doubled risk of breast cancer, and whereas the highest soy intake was associated with less breast cancer, even in those who carry the cancer gene. With prostate cancer, there have been a number of really interesting studies. For example, Dean Ornish, who did the heart disease research, moved into the area of prostate cancer with the same kind of lifestyle intervention and found that there was inhibition of prostate cancer cell growth 8 times as much in his lifestyle intervention group compared with the control group. There also have been studies that indicated that vegan diets reduce DNA damage, improve DNA repair, lower IGF-1 levels, that's an indicator of cancer cell proliferation, favorably alter the fecal enzymes and gut microflora. In other words, when we put different food down into our intestine, the populations of bacteria, microorganisms that are down there really changes and can be very health supportive on a plant-based diet. And reduce levels of various toxic metabolites. And some of the interesting research has come to us from Scandinavia, showing that especially on raw food diets, raw vegan diets, these changes can be very, very favorable. The amount of soy that turns out to be protective with regard to prostate cancer is on average 2 servings of some sort of soy foods a day. It could be edamame, soy milk, tofu, tempeh. And that's linked with a reduced cancer risk of 30 to 50%, prostate cancer. We noticed before that body weight decreased with fewer animal products in the diet. Well, it turns out from the Adventist Health Study that risk of type 2 diabetes also follows that change in body mass index in a way that's very parallel. In fact, it's an even greater risk of type 2 diabetes has dropped markedly. The take-home message with regard to these chronic diseases: populations eating plant-based diets have lower rates of chronic disease, cardiovascular disease, cancers, type 2 diabetes. So there's less risk in the first place, and also such diets may be therapeutic. Cataracts, especially among vegans, all those carotenoids, the orange, red, yellow, green vegetables really help, and the fruits that are those colorful colors as well. Diverticular disease, Of course, the fiber's beneficial. Endocrine disorders, gallstones, renal disease, and rheumatoid arthritis. There have been studies, mainly in Scandinavia again, but some in North America as well, that showed that the symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis were significantly reduced, especially on raw diets. These were raw vegan diets that also excluded grains that were gluten-containing. And when people started putting the foods back into their diets again, if they did, then some of the symptoms came back. So not everybody was helped by the raw vegan diet, but many of the people with rheumatoid arthritis were. Here's some aging vegan women that I'm aware of, and you may know of some more that are good examples. But first of all, on your top left is my co-author Brenda Davis at age 54. She keeps herself in really good health and has a good plant-based diet, been vegan for close to 20 years now. Next is Sherry Soria in the top line, my co-author on an earlier raw book, The Raw Food Revolution Diet. Here she is at age 64, and she has 3 black belts in karate. Then below her is Ruth Heydrich, who was considered one of America's top 10 fittest women. She's won 6 Ironman triathlons. She became vegan after getting breast cancer, and has been vegan for decades since that time with no recurrence, and she's an outstanding triathlete. Then Laureen Dinwiddie at 108, she's on the west coast in Oregon, and Samayaka in India at 120. So these are all some good examples of vegan women. There's also some good examples of vegan men. John Robbins, who wrote Diet for a New America at age 65 here. Paul McCartney, who's 72 this month, same year I was born, and he's lively and doing lots of things. Jim Morris, a bodybuilder at age 77. Dr. Bill Harris, a physician in Hawaii. Mike Fremont at 91 after a half marathon. And one you can see on the internet, a cardiologist, a cardiothoracic surgeon who retired at age 95. He's now 98, but a very articulate and interesting man to observe. Bill Harris, who's a friend of ours, celebrated his 80th birthday a couple of years ago by jumping out of a plane with some of his friends twice, and we were there at the bottom to take some pictures and see how he did. But he told me a week or so ago that he's just taking up paragliding now. I think he's 83 now. So I asked him if he was still jumping out of planes. He said, oh yes, but now I'm taking up this as well. Now, to wind up, are vegan diets adequate? It's the position of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, this was formerly called the American Dietetic Association, that appropriately planned vegetarian diets, including total vegetarian or vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases, and are appropriate during all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, and adolescence, and for athletes. The image shown here, the vegan plate, shows putting together a nutritionally adequate pattern, and it's from our books. What we've tried to do is give people really good, clear guidance that's very simple. Just follow this kind of a pattern, and it can be done whether you're a gourmet cook or like to keep life very simple and don't have much time, but to follow a certain pattern and meet the recommended intakes for every nutrient. The kind of pattern that would be followed is to eat a balance of vegetables, fruits, legumes, grains, nuts, and seeds. And you also need to include reliable sources of vitamins B12, vitamin D that can be from sunlight or supplements, and omega-3 fatty acids that could be from flaxseed, walnuts, flaxseed oil, chia or hemp. Can you get tasty food wherever you travel? Well, a lot of you are aware of many, many good options, and the local vegetarian associations are really helpful with this. Two good websites are happycow.net and vegdining.com that give really good guidance. You can click on the continent you're going to, the city, and choose whether you're looking for raw or vegan or near vegan, and you'll find plenty of different options in locations around the world. With our Becoming Raw book, we have recipes with nutritional analysis as well as a lot of good nutrition information. And this and the Becoming Vegan Express are both at your bookstore at the event, I think. And the juice, for example, green juice, we've got nutritional analysis, had a lab analysis done of that, about how to sprout lentils and mung beans. Great salads, macaroons that are made very simply, cashew creams, pizzas, raw soups, and rye crackers that are all raw, and my favorite pie, which is a very simple, just has 3 ingredients in the crust: dates, nuts, and coconut, and in the filling it's just mango, fresh and dried mango, and it keeps its firmness because of the dried mango, which is soaked and blended. Anyway, there's some just terrific recipes, all with nutritional analysis. So we can do really well, as I think this festival's helping you find lots of support to love animals and not for dinner, and express that in your lifestyle. We know that so many animals like pigs have a lot of consciousness, and it doesn't make sense to love one but eat the other. And so thank you very much. I look forward to talking with you now on Skype.